Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Yevamot Kuf Yutet. It's our last day with presentations. So again, thank you to the whole team of people working on the presentations, both the writers, the designers, and the translators, which were really critical. Okay, reminder, the Siyum is on Sunday. Okay, even though the Masechet finishes on Thursday, we did the Siyum on Sunday to allow more people to be able to attend, even though I know Sunday may be less good for other people, but we tried to do apropos our daf, we go after the majority. So I think the majority Sunday is good, which by the way, reminds me, happy July 4th to those of you celebrating. And what I wanted to just remind everybody, a really, really important fact, which is Thursday, there's regular class, and we're going to learn the beginning part. I know I keep saying this, but to those who don't listen to every class. So sorry that I sound a little boring, but Thursday we'll be learning the daf, the first half of the daf. And we're only going to start from the Mishna at the bottom of Kuf Chaf Bet, at the bottom at the Siyum. So make sure if you want to finish, if you're finishing the Masechet, first of all, you're invited even if you're not finishing the Masechet. If you are finishing the Masechet and you want to finish at the Siyum, make sure to get to the Mishna that starts at the very bottom of Kuf Chaf Bet, and we'll start from there at the Siyum, and then everything eventually will go up on the site. So if you listen through the podcast, it'll come in two separate sections and a bit out of order, because it'll only be after we've already started Ketubot. There's no other way around that. Okay. So if you haven't registered for the Siyum, registration's open. It's on the homepage. So please make sure to register and you'll get your Zoom link. And if for some reason you don't get your Zoom link right away, then you should call, write to us by email and let us know, because you should get it immediately after registering. Okay, today's stuff, we have a lot of sponsorships. Today's stuff is sponsored by Shelley and Jerry Gornish in loving memory of their dear grandson, Oz Wilczyk, on his 6th Shiur at site. Today's stuff is sponsored by Harriet Hartman in loving memory of Moshe Hartman. In life, you expanded my horizons beyond all expectations. In your honor, I now feel my life expanding beyond all expectations through Hadron Staff Yomi. Thank you, and thanks to Rabbanit Michelle and Hadron for all the inspiration and insight. Today's stuff is sponsored by Gita Jaroslawis Neufeld in loving memory of her father, Philip Jaroslawis. Yosef ben Menachem Mendel Upeshi. My father raised us to love learning, alav shalom. My father raised us to love learning and live Torah. While he might have said no when we asked for a new game, he never said no when we asked for books. His love of learning and passion for chesed are stamped strongly in the spiritual DNA of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Today's stuff is sponsored by Medina Khajaj, in honor of, I see now this didn't come out in the chat, 1 second. Today's stuff is sponsored by Adina Khajaj in memory of Miriam Kirzner's birthday. Your late night dedication to learning the daf with Hadran and Rabbanit Michelle, intellectually immersing yourself in a whole new world of Talmud, is an ongoing testament to the inspiration you've been for us all your life. We wish you many more years of learning and spiritual growth with lots of love from your brother and sister, Barry and Elaine Greenstone, and all your nieces and nephews, grandnieces and nephews, and great-grandnieces and nephews. And today's stuff is dedicated to Gilit Summer by her children. We wish our dear Ima a very happy birthday and a big shkoyach for learning Masechet Yevamot. We're very proud of your dedication to learning, your openness to taking on this challenge. We are inspired by you, Ali Vatzlichi. Okay, a lot of dedications. Just happens once in a while that they're all timely and they all end up on one day. Okay, getting to our daf now. So we're starting the 16th and the final chapter. We're continuing. It's really a continuation of the previous chapter. We now have a woman who goes with her, she doesn't go, she stays put. Her husband and her rival wife go off abroad. So now he goes off, he has no children. However, he goes off with a wife, so who knows, maybe they had children. So when she hears her husband died, and here it's not an issue of believing the testimony or not, it's clear he's dead. But she can't, right now, this is what we call a classic aguna. She's stuck. She can't get married. She can't do yibum because maybe he had a child and then she can basically marry anyone she wants. But maybe he didn't have a child. I'm sorry. Yeah, maybe he had a child and she can marry anyone she wants. Or maybe he didn't have a child, in which case she has to marry the brother. Now, she can't marry the brother if she's not sure because it's Esharach, right? She's the Esharach. She's the wife of his brother. It's correct. So she's stuck. Right, we'll see later. I mean, theoretically, she could do chalitza. We'll see why she doesn't do chalitza. So until when does she need to wait? And it's not so clear when this is. We'll get to this later in the Gemara. But ad sheteda shema meuberet hitzarata, until she finds out for sure that the other wife didn't have a child, because maybe she was pregnant when he died. Okay. Now, what if she never finds out, right? How long? We don't know. Because remember, the other wife is not in the scene. She's not here. So it's a little bit tricky because how are we going to figure out whether, right, there's no communication. Haytala chamot. What if her husband, okay, let's say her husband didn't go abroad, okay, but the mother-in-law went abroad. Now, why is the mother-in-law important? Because let's say the mother-in-law, okay, haytala chamot, and the husband dies, and he had no brothers. However, the mother-in-law went off somewhere. Right? You have to understand this in light of they got married young, obviously, and the mother-in-law could still be of childbearing age, in which case maybe she ended up having a son when she was abroad, in which case she's obligated in yibum. Otherwise, right, in other words, you have to pay attention. What's the chazaka in each case? In the first case, the chazaka was there were no children and she was obligated in yibum. Right? The chazaka is where we were before the scene happened, right? When what we do know for sure. What we know for sure in the beginning, or at least where we started, the starting point was the last we knew he didn't have any children and she was obligated in yibum. Here, last we knew he didn't have a brother and she wasn't obligated in yibum. And in the end, right, she really theoretically could marry anyone she wants. What's the problem? Maybe there was a child born who was male. And right, because there it would only be a male child. In the first case, it's also a big difference between the cases. In the first case, it's any child, because any child exempts from yibum. But when it comes to, is there a yabam or is there not a yabam? Well, obviously, yabam can only be a brother, can only be male. So basically, we say, if haytala chamot, in this case, eina chosheshet. She doesn't have to worry that maybe she had a son, okay? And we'll get in the Gemara to the difference why. Unless, yatzta mele'ah, if when the mother-in-law went out, she was already pregnant, then there's going to be an issue. Actually, just realized that I think we have presentations on this. Second. Yeah. Okay. So here's our scene. Okay. The truth is you don't really need the presentations for this, right? The earlier part of the Masechet definitely needed it more. This is a little less complicated, but again, Reuven's married to two women. They go off and basically Reuven dies. Should Yael do yibum or not? Right. And so basically we don't know if, the truth is, right. So here, maybe she had a baby and then Yael would be prohibited to Shimon if she in fact had a child, right? But if not, then not. And here's the mother-in-law, and here she goes off, and Reuven dies, and Yael is permitted to marry. But if she's pregnant, as you see our cute little pregnant woman here, if she's pregnant, then we have to be concerned that she had a baby. And then, so if Reuven dies, Yael is prohibited to marry until such time as she finds out for sure either there was no son or that there was a son, and then she has to do yibum with him. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer eina chosheshet. Rabbi Yehoshua is not concerned for this possibility either. Okay, he basically doesn't worry. And then what's the question? Well, the question is there's a lot of statistical issues here. Leah went off, she was pregnant. Now, even if she's pregnant, maybe she miscarried. Even if she didn't miscarry and she carried full term and she had a baby, maybe the baby was a girl and then it's irrelevant. So there's a lot of maybes here. And therefore, Rabbi Yehoshua says there's no reason for concern. So the Gemara starts off with a question on the language of the Mishna. It says in the first case, Ad sheteda shema me'uberet hi tzarata. Until she knows, right? Maybe me'uberet, she is her tzara. Now, it's a bit of a weird language. Should have just said shema me'uberet tzarata or shema me'uberet hi. But you don't need hi tzarata. You don't need both those words. So my hi tzarata. So they're saying that they must have used that language for emphasis. Hakamashvan, it's to emphasize what? To teach us lahat tzara udecheshina, aval tzara achrite lo cheshina. We're only worried that maybe he had a child with that other woman. We're not worried that maybe he went and found another wife and maybe had a child with her. Like, let's say we find out for sure that wife didn't give birth. Do we have to worry, or let's say he went off without a tzara? Do we have to worry that maybe he married someone in the interim and then she got pregnant and had a child, right? So that far we don't have to go. Lo tinaseh v'lo tityabem. So now the Gemara says, why both possibilities? Why can't she marry and why can't she do yibum? So bishlama yibum elo didilma me'abra v'kapaga be'eshet achto, right? We understand why she can't do yibum with the brother. Because, again, this is the first case where the tzara maybe had a baby. If the tzara has a baby, we all know. She's not allowed to marry Shimon, the brother, because that's she is the wife of his brother. That's Isur Kare. So if in the event the woman has a child, of course she can't do yibum. But why can't she get married? Why don't we say, halach achal rov nashim? Let's go by majority, statistical majority. Rov nashim mitabrot v'yodot. The fact is that the majority of women, right? Unfortunately, we know, right? Many of us know women, or it might be women who can't get pregnant or can get pregnant but can't carry to full term. But that's not the majority. And if we go in halacha by the majority, we can assume that if he went abroad with his wife, chances are she got pregnant. And if she got pregnant, chances are she carried to full term, even though in those days, it's actually much more common that the baby might not make it, but still the majority of babies did make it. So in that case, since we don't go by the majority and basically say this woman should be allowed to marry, she could just assume that there was a child born. Why not? So the Gemara first suggests, Lema Rabbi Meir. Maybe our Mishna is Rabbi Meir. You might remember Rabbi Meir. What's Rabbi Meir? Well, not just from Rabbi Meir, but specifically this approach of Rabbi Meir. He is concerned for minority opinions, more minority possibilities, I should say. In what case? We're going to see it inside soon, but I'll remind you. Oh, minor, he says, we've seen this a few times in the Masechet. It's always fun at the end of the Masechet. They quote all sorts of things that we've already learned, so it's good review. Basically, if a minor can't do yibum, why can't they do yibum? Because maybe there'll be an ilonit, or maybe there'll be a saris, right? A male will be a saris, a woman will be an ilonit, they won't be able to have children, in which case they'd be exempt from yibum. And if you're exempt from yibum, you can't marry the brother, right? That's karet, that's isurei shalach. So because of that, we maybe are saying, just like Rabbi Meir is concerned for minority and doesn't allow yibum in a case of a minor, likewise here, they won't allow the woman to remarry, even though probably, statistically, we can assume that the tzara had a child, meaning her husband had a child, meaning she's not obligated in yibum, she can marry anyone she wants. But we're not going to allow that because we're worried about minority opinions, right? About minority possibilities. To which the Gemara says, not necessarily. Afilu tema Rabbanan. Now remember Rabbi Meir, because in the end we're going to come back to Rabbi Meir. We're going to have an issue explaining this going to the rabbis, but we're going to try. So now they say, even Rabbanan, you could say the following. Even though the rabbis generally follow majority and aren't concerned for minority possibilities. So for example, Katan Ktana can do yibum as far as they're concerned. Why? Because most people are not Iloniot or Srisi, so therefore it should be fine. You can assume that that will be true for whoever this person is, and therefore allow them to do yibum, and not worry about some minor possibility like that. But that's only ki azeh b'tanam taruba. Okay, now forget that I said about a katan and a ktana, because this is going to knock out the answer. But we're going to say that when the rabbis hold by majority, when did they hold by majority? Ki azeh b'taruba. These are the most classic cases of robe. The Torah says, right? And they're talking about judgment. That means when you have majority of judges, we all know recent Supreme Court events, right? We go by the majority ruling. So majority rules, and what's the majority? It's a majority that's in front of our faces. We count how many people voted yes, how many people voted no, and we go by majority. Likewise, Tesha Chanuyot, right? Where did the meat come from? Were there are 9 kosher stores, 1 non-kosher store. Again, there's distinctions, whether it came from one of the stores or whether you went into one of the stores. Anyway, not going to get into those distinctions. But when we do follow majority there, it's because there's this, you can see the majority in front of you. There's 9 stores that all sell kosher meat, 1 butcher shop that sells non-kosher meat. That's a majority that's in front of you. But Amaruba deleta kaman. Now, what's a rove that's not in front of you? That's us. That's the statistical rove. This is, what do the statistics say? We only have 1 person in front of us, right? This woman who left to Medina Hayan, did she get pregnant and have a child or not? That's 1 woman. That's not a rove that's in front of us. That's statistical majority. We don't follow rove and statistical majorities. That's what we're going to assume Rabbanit say. You already know that that's not true because the Katan and Tana is also a statistical majority. Okay, but right now the Gemara is suggesting that That's where the rabbis say. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. But what? Wait, a minor, the case we talked about. It's a statistical majority. It's not a majority of people in front of us, and we're going by the majority. To which they say, in that case, there they also follow the majority. How do we know? Titania. Rabbi Meir doesn't allow chalitza or yibum. Rabbi Meir. I agree with you about chalitza. The rabbi said, we agree with you about chalitza. Why? Remember, ish k'tiv b'parsha u'makshina nisha le'ish. A katan can't because the parsha says ish when it talks about chalitza. A woman, k'tana, can't, a minor. Why? Because ish, and we assume just like ish, the woman also has to be an isha, even though it doesn't say explicitly. So we'll agree with you about chalitza because it's what we call a gzerat hakatuv. So it says in the Torah, we can't argue, we don't bring logic. But when it comes to matam, emi yavnim, well, what's your reason for why they can't do yibum? Amar lahem, Rabbi Meir said to them, katan shemi matzeh saris, katana shemati matzeh alonit. Exactly what we said. The minor, right? They might be in a saris or an ilonit, which means they can't have children. V'nimtzu pogim be'erva, and then they ended up marrying the brother. Either she married the brother or the brother married her, depending on who was who, in a case where it was basically forbidden. For Rabbanan Savre, the rabbis hold zilber teruba diktanim v'rov tanim lav srisim. They say we hold by that. So in the end, our potential answer to distinguish between a statistical majority and a majority that's in front of us fails. Okay, because even the rabbis, we can't say the rabbis would hold here in our case, like a statistical majority, that even then we don't hold by it. No, can't be true. To which the Gemara goes back now to the original answer. Rabbi Meir. Okay, so they say it must be our Mishna's Rabbi Meir. Again, let's just review. The woman, her husband, and rival wife go off to Medina Hayam. We have to be concerned for the minority of people who basically might not end up having children, might not get pregnant, or might not be able to carry the baby. And because of that, we have to worry. Maybe she's not obligated in yibum, and therefore she's stuck. Okay, because of that. You're asking, does statistical majority come up in other cases? It absolutely does. Okay, it comes up a lot. This is often, and they might not call it that, but often we've seen it here with Rabbi Meir and the rabbis, where we always talk about rov. There's rov and there's chazaka, and there's all sorts of things that come into play all the time. Okay, we're going to talk about chazaka and rov. Chazaka can mean two things. Okay, chazaka can mean we assume most people behave in a particular way. We saw that recently, right? Rov is we assume most people, right, fall into this category or another, rather, right? They have children or they don't have children. That's rov. And then there's chazaka, which we're going to see today. We talked about this recently, which is where are you at every given point? Like right now, we presumed you to be, a married woman, or we presumed you not to have a yibum, or we presumed you something. That's presumption as to where you are right now before something new comes in, which is a little bit like status quo. This was the status quo until now, right? These are all concepts that are used. That's what makes these dapim great, because they're not just, right, some of the dapim we've learned are specifically very much yibum related and not connected to anything else. These sugyot are great sugyot, not just because they're interesting, but also, and maybe a little easier to understand than some others, although conceptually they're much harder to understand, like why would a statistical majority theoretically be different than a majority of things that are in front of you, right? These are all require a lot of in-depth thinking about why the rabbis would think to distinguish these things. But they're concepts that are used all over in halacha. So yes, it comes up in other cases as well. Okay, so now we're going to assume our Mishnah that worries that maybe she's pregnant, that really it's worries maybe she's not pregnant, and the fact that we don't allow this woman to go and remarry anybody because assume that the woman had a baby, well, that is Rabbi Meir. But wait a minute. Rabbi Meir, we're now about 12 lines from the bottom. So wait, you're saying the Mishnah's Rabbi Meir? If you're going to say that, we have a problem with the end part. If we're choshesh l'miuta, look at the end of the Mishnah. Ema seifa. Haytala chamot ena chosheshet. If she has a mother-in-law, we're not worried that she had a child. Amai. Halacha rov nashim v'rov nashim mitabrot v'yodot. Right? Let's start following this. If we're worried about minority statistics, okay, like Rabbi Meir is, minority possibilities, I should say. If we're worried about minority possibilities, then we should worry that this mother-in-law gave birth to a boy, because that's a minority, and it's a minority. We should be, if Rabbi Meir is concerned with the minority of someone being a saris, statistically, it's much higher possibility that the woman went abroad and had a boy. Okay, let's go through. Because rov nashi, most people mitabrot v'yodot. Okay, majority of women will get pregnant and will have children. Mi'ut mipilot. Okay, minority miscarry. V'kol hayodot, and anyone who gives birth, right? There's a 50-50 chance, male or female. Mechzes charim, mechzes nekevot. Smoch mi'uta de mipilot lemechzes nekevot. So now let's start adding up. We have some will miscarry. So that gets rid of, I don't know, let's say, I have no idea in those days what the statistics, let's just say 5%. So we're left with 95%. Of those 95%, we're going to split them in half, right? And we're going to have half of those male, half of those female. We're already under 50%. So we get to the minority. So they're a minority. Now they're actually a big minority, much larger than the amount that are srisim or ailoniot. And yet, what do you see here? We're not concerned for that possibility that she had a male. So the Gemara says, "V'lichush," right? So they say, "Kevan di'ichaz kalashuk lo chayish." So they say, what's the reason? As I tell, we're going to use rov and chazaka and all that. There's a chazaka here, meaning the woman was already bechazkat that she could marry. When the mother-in-law went abroad, if the husband had died that day that the mother-in-law left, okay, or maybe you'd have to say 3 months before, because we don't know, maybe she's pregnant, okay? If 3 months, or I don't know, let's say the mother-in-law's husband had died and it was 3 months, whatever it might be. We assumed at that point there was no brother, right? He had no brother alive at the time. So if that's the case, then, right, the truth is at that point it would be, because it would be ach shelo ba'al olam, right? So basically, if the mother-in-law left that day, no problem. She could go marry anyone she wanted. Because that was her status at that point, we just continue that status we don't let a minority override the chazak. That's what they're going to say right now. Hold off, because we're going to see, maybe sometimes it does. But right now, okay, this is why we get to these principles. We have things operating in different directions. You have to be choshesh l'miuta. On the other hand, we have a chazaka that she's allowed to marry anybody because he doesn't have a brother. There is no yabam. So therefore, we're not choshesh. To which case they go back to the first case. They say, wait a minute. If you're going to say, we're not choshesh l'miut when there's a chazaka, so let's go to the first case. There was a chazaka also. What was the first case? The husband went abroad. He had no children, right? So the chazaka was, she's obligated in yibum. There he did have a brother. So they say, reisha di chazak liyibum tiyabim. If your whole thing is that when there's a chazaka and there's rov, we're going to go by chazaka, with this chazaka versus a minority, right? We're going to follow chazaka. So we should follow the chazaka, what she was presumed, her presumed status from the beginning. So therefore, she should do yibum, and we don't allow her to do yibum. So Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, we're going to have two answers to this question. Reisha d'isur karei chashashu, seifa d'isur lav lo chashashu. Wait a minute, you're distinguishing between two different isurim bichlal, two different severity, right? The severity of the action is much less in the second case. In the first case, if you allow her to do yibum based on the chazaka, when you have a miut that maybe will say she's not obligated in yibum, she's going to end up marrying Eshadach. He's going to marry Eshadach, right? The wife of his brother. That is karei. That's very serious. We want to avoid that, even if there's a miut of a chance that she's obligated. But in the other case, where she was permitted to marry anybody, remember, what happens if she's obligated in yibum and she goes out and marries some random person? So that's lo tieh eshet hamet chutza leish zal. The wife of the dead person is not allowed to marry anybody else. That's just a negative commandment. That's much less severe. There will allow her to do that. We won't allow her, though, to do karei based on the miut. Okay, so in other words, there we're going to allow the miut is going to prevent her from being able to do this mitzvah yibum because we want to avoid Isur karei. But in the second case, the miut is not going to prevent her from marrying someone in the shuk because that's just an Isur lav. Rava doesn't like this answer at all. I'm a Rava. They're both forbidden by the Torah. What's the difference if one gets carried and one is lav? Which is a funny thing to say because we always distinguish between severity of punishments. We've done this a lot of times already in the Masechet, but he comes and says, we're not going to distinguish. Basically, he says, we're not going to allow her to do something against the Torah based on minority, that it's a minority on the other end and whatever. That doesn't make any sense. So he basically has to come up with a different answer. So why, again, if we're choshesh l'mi'ut, why in the first case we don't allow her to do yibum, but in the second case, we allow her to go marry and she doesn't have to worry about the minority of cases where the mother-in-law might have had a son. And here again, we're going to go back to this chazaka and rov and how they work together. Again, the chazaka here is not chazaka of we assume that people behave in a particular manner. That's a different kind of chazaka. Chazaka here is their status at the time, right, before the unknown happens. Okay, their presumptive status. So in the Reisha, chazaka liyibum, v'ruba l'shuk. The chazaka and the rov are operating against each other. The chazaka, the presumed status, again, the wife goes off abroad with the husband. She's still here, the other wife. And the presumed status at that point is he has no children, do yibum. What does the rov say? The rov says, lashuk. The rov is most women have children, get pregnant, have children. So chances are he has a child. So we have chazaka and rov pulling in different directions. Now, here we get to when we have chazaka and rov operating against each other, which wins out? Chazaka lo adif kiruba. Presumptive status is not as strong as rov. Statistical majority overrides chazaka. Okay, presumptive status. But if we're Rabbi Meir, we're choshesh l'mi'uta. So right now, if we put them on a scale, right, the rov that says she can go marry in the shuk will allow her to go marry in the shuk because probably the wife had a child. But since we're Rabbi Meir, aiti mi'uta to mipilot. But we're going to put on that other side of the scale where the chazaka is the presumptive status that would say she's chayiv in yibum. And we're going to add to it the minority of cases of women who don't end up having children, and maybe that wife never had a child. V'havele palgu palga. And now the scale is going to be even. And that's why lo tinaseh v'lo tikabem. That's why this woman is stuck. Because on the one hand, we have the chazaka and the mi'ut, the minority. And on the other hand, we have the rov, and that's going to all equal out. Again, if you were the rabbis, you wouldn't have, and that's why this Mishna only matches Rabbi Meir. If you were the rabbis, you just have rov and chazaka, and rov would outweigh chazaka, and she would basically be able to go marry. And that's why they had to say the Mishna is Rabbi Meir, because the rabbis would hold rov outweighs chazaka, and we ignore the minority. But what we need to explain now is the seifa. That was the whole question. This actually was pretty clear before, but it's just we didn't see it in these terms. But now it's apply these terms to the next case. Seifa, what's the chazaka of the woman? The woman's mother-in-law goes abroad, she has no children. So even though the first woman has no children either with her husband, and her husband dies childless, there was no yabam to begin with. So the chazaka says her presumptive status was she can go marry anyone she wants. She's not obligated in yibum. So seifa chazaka l'shuk. I mean, she can go marry anyone. And what's the rov? Rov women don't have males, basically, right? Chances are there's more of a percentage that she either didn't carry the full term or didn't get pregnant or had a girl, in which case there wouldn't be a yabam. So the rov works together with the chazaka. In that case, you don't have to worry about miut because the rov and chazaka are on the same side of the scale. So the miut is, you stick the miut, the minority on the other side, that's certainly not going to outweigh rov and chazaka. So havel is chalim miuta de miuta. Right? In other words, the fact that it's going to be a male is like a very small minority of possibilities. It's not really. It's a high percentage of the minority possibility, but it can't stand up against the rov and the chazaka. And therefore, miuta de miuta lo chayish Rabbi Meir. When it's just miut against a rov, we'll let it win. But when the rov has a chazaka also, then we're not going to hold by rov. Okay, and that's how we in the end distinguish and show that the Mishna is Rabbi Meir. And don't worry, from the second part doesn't contradict. The second part is different from the first part because the rov and chazaka are working together rather than against each other. Now let's go back to lo tinaseh v'lo tityabem. We're back in the first case. The tzara goes abroad. Maybe she has a child. Maybe she doesn't. We don't know. So we don't know, and therefore the woman is stuck. Ula olam, is it forever? Like, how long is she stuck for? If there's no communication, she never hears whether they had a child. Is she always, this is, your classic aguna. Is she an aguna forever? Amar Ze'eri. Ze'eri says, la'atzma shlosha chodeshim. Okay, this is not our case. This is, la'atzma is, by the way, Rashi says la'olam is bitmiha. What Rashi says, the real question is a little different than I said, which is, it's not, is it forever? But it's saying, it's forever. And what Rashi says, really, the question is, tachlotz mimanavshach. Why don't you just allow her to do chalitza and let her get out of it, right? Chalitza, we've learned before, you can do chalitza misafek, right? No, it's worse, right? Either it's nothing or it is chalitza and it'll help her. So we'll get back to that soon. So Ze'eri and Rabbi Hanina disagree about this. Ze'eri says, if the husband dies and maybe she's pregnant, this isn't where the husband was abroad, the husband was with her, she has to wait 3 months. We know that we had a whole section about. Lechaverta, if she has to worry, maybe her tzara, her rival wife is pregnant and she's not around, tisha, she waits 9 months. If after 9 months she hasn't heard anything, she can already go get remarried. But she can't just get remarried. She has to do chalitza. So here they basically answer Rashi's question by saying, yeah, you do chalitza, but you wait the 9 months first because maybe she'll have a baby and maybe you'll hear about it. And then you'll avoid doing the chalitza. We'll see why later we want to avoid chalitza, not just because it could be an unpleasant ceremony, but there's other reasons, which we have actually seen before. Rabbi Hanina Amal, la'atzma shlosha, he agrees with that, right? You wait 3 months, everybody agrees about that. Lechaverta le'olam. But when it comes to the tzara, if you never hear, you never have any communication with this woman anymore, don't hear any news, you're stuck forever. Okay. Luckily, nowadays, it would be less likely for this situation to occur. In those days, it was actually definitely more common. To which they say, v'tachlotz mimanavshach. Why doesn't she just do chalitza, right? And then, either way, either the chalitza will be a meaningless action, or it will be chalitza and take care of her yibum, and then she can go marry anyone she wants. So Abai Barav and Rabbi Chanina Barav and Amrit Chabayu, both these brothers, they said together, Ksera Shema Yehevla Ben Kayama. Maybe in the end, we'll find out for sure that there was a child. Witnesses will come and tell us. This woman who did chalitza, now it turns out her chalitza wasn't chalitza because she wasn't obligated. What will you have to do now, which we want to avoid? You'll have to make an announcement that this woman is permitted to a Kohen. Why do you have to make that announcement? Because people will know that she did a chalitza. A woman who does chalitza by rabbinic law is forbidden to a Kohen. So you'll have to announce it this way, because if this woman goes and marries a Kohen, people will think, oh, chalitza can marry a Kohen. And they can't. So you'd have to make a big announcement about it. To which the Gemara says, okay, we've talked about this announcement before. We've had this kind of discussion. Okay, so make an announcement. You're going to not allow this woman to do chalitza on the off chance that maybe witnesses will come. Say they had a son. Then it turns out her chalitza wasn't good, and then she can actually marry a Kohen, but people won't know that, and they'll then think that. So make an announcement, and then you'll resolve the issue. But we already know with announcements, maybe people will have seen the chalitza, but they won't have seen the hachraza. Va'amre kasharu chalutza lekohen. And then people will think that a chalutza can marry a Kohen. This is a crazy situation because what the rabbis are saying, and I only say this is crazy because I want you to see how much they were worried about this. This is where I think the rabbis worry about protecting rabbinic law, sometimes maybe too much, okay? But they obviously had some serious reason for doing this because they're basically making a woman an aguna in order to avoid, right? Theoretically, they could just do chalitza. But because of this concern that people will see, if you're talking about statistical majorities, minorities, right? What are the chances are that this chalutza will specifically decide to marry a Kohen and people won't see they won't have heard the announcement and they'll think that a chalutza can marry a Kohen, all because of that, we're not going to allow this woman to do chalitza. It's really hard to believe, okay? But yes, we've had this before where they're strict with rabbinic and they're very worried that people won't take this chalutza thing seriously. This a chalutza not marrying a Kohen. So it's very interesting, right? Interesting that you're suggesting, Becky, why not let her swear that you are married Kohen? Wait till we get to Gittin, you'll see that they don't like people to swear, especially women. They didn't like them taking swears, and even vows may be better, but not swearing, all sorts of reasons to avoid doing that. They tried to avoid as much as they could, those kind of things. In any case, it's quite a difficult situation. I mean, again, how likely is this situation in the first place, right? But anyway, okay. Now, this is all assuming what Rabbi Baravin and Rabbi Chanina Baravin said, that it's a gzera, shema yehev la ben kayama, and then she's going to be proven wrong. And then, right, then she'll end up marrying a Kohen, and then it's her chalitza. Sorry, I didn't say, right, she'll be proven right, actually, that she really didn't have to do yibum or chalitza, and she went married according to halacha. But if it's a Kohen that she marries later on and it's permitted, right, people will think that a chalitza can marry a Kohen. So it's none. Wait a minute. Look back at the Mishna we learned yesterday. Nitami ben b'medinat hayam. If she goes abroad with her husband and then says, oh, by the way, when I was there, I had a son, but my son died and then my husband died. So basically, same as I was in the beginning, I didn't have a son when my husband died, so I'm exempt from yibum. I'm obligated in yibum. I have to go marry the brother. She's believed and she can do yibum. But if she says, if we didn't even know of her son's existence, and then she says, well, in fact, my son was still alive when my husband died, and I'm not obligated in yibum, and we don't believe her. Why? Because we're worried she's lying just to get out of yibum. The lichush. Now, here comes the question. Why aren't we concerned? Dilma'atu edim ba'amre. Oh, sorry, I skipped the important line. But we are concerned for what she says. In other words, we don't, in the end, what she's basically saying is, we don't believe her that she's not obligated in yibum. So we make her do yibum. On the other hand, we somewhat believe her that maybe she is telling the truth, in which case she can't do yibum because she's eshet ach, she's the wife of his brother. In which case we basically say do chalitza and not yibum. So what do you see here? It's a safek case. We do chalitza and then yibum. So not yibum. We do chalitza. Even though theoretically witnesses could come down the road and say she had a son, in which case she'd end up being exactly like the previous woman, where her chalitza was totally meaningless, which is fine, except if she goes and marries a Kohen, people will say, right, they'll have to announce, and if they announce it, what's wrong with that? Well, maybe not everyone's going to hear the announcement. People will see she marries a Kohen, and they'll think the chalitzas can marry Kohanim. So, a chalutza. So, why aren't we worried in this case? To which we're going to have to do what we call an ukimta. We're going to have to say that case in the Mishna where they require her to do chalitza is only a very unique case. Okay, either one of two possibilities. Amar Papa bigrusha, that she would only do chalitza if she was already a divorcee from a previous marriage. If she's a divorcee, then obviously there's no issue for kahuna. She can't marry a Kohen anyway. So we try to avoid. We say it's only in a situation where this could never happen. Could never happen. She can marry a Kohen because she's a grusha. Or Rav Chia Bered Rav Huna Amar Ba'amra Ani v'hu nechbeinu b'ma'ara. If she says we were hiding in a cave and no human saw us, okay, let's say, right? Let's try to make the situation realistic. She was in a cave. She got pregnant. She lived there for, let's say, a year. I don't know. Within that, the child was born and the child died. So there was no human contact at all. So there was no one who could testify about her. This is only a concern if someone comes in the future and testifies about her, we'll be stuck, right? Because then she really won't, it'll be clear she's not a chalitza. It's the only case where she'll actually be able to marry a Kohen. At this point, she can't marry a Kohen because she's a chalitza of nisafeh. Once it's clear, so basically we're going to say, it's just not, it will never be clear in this case. That's the case when the Mishna requires chalitza, would only be in a case like that, or in a case where she anyway couldn't marry a Kohen, she was a divorcee. Okay, new Mishna. Shtei Yevamot. Let's go back to the presentation. We have two Yevamot. So Yael is married to Reuven and Tamar is married to Shimon. Okay, so Reuven and Shimon are brothers. They each have a wife. Zo omeret met ba'ali. So Yael says, my husband died, which means what? We can assume he's dead because we believe her. At this point, she has to do yibum with Shimon. But what if Tamar says, Zo omeret met ba'ali? Tamar says, my husband died. Now, if you remember, in the list of women who are not believed about each other, is the Yevamot. Yael and Tamar are what we call Yevamot zolazo. It means that Yael could potentially end up being a future rival wife to Tamar if her husband dies. And Tamar could be a future rival wife to Yael if, right, I mean, either way, right? If Tamar's husband dies, she'll marry Reuven. So basically, those women theoretically are in the list of women who aren't believed because they could hate each other. So what happens now? If Yael's husband dies, based on her own testimony, she's supposed to do yibum with Shimon. But Shimon is maybe dead. But how do we know Shimon's dead? Based on Tamar's testimony. So Yael theoretically should be able to marry anyone she wants, but she can't because her testimony is based on, her evidence is based on her Yevamah's testimony, which was not believed, relating to Yael. And the same thing with Tamar. So, if they both say that, if we can't find Reuven or Shimon, each one assumes, regards to them, their husband is dead. But regards to the other woman, the husband's still alive, meaning there's a yabam out there and they can't marry until they deal with the yabam. And they can't find the yabam because he's lost in action. So they're stuck. Now we're going to talk about, okay, without the presentation, let's just go back for a minute. Lizo edim v'lazo ein edim. What if, okay, there's no presentation here because there's nothing to show, but let's say witnesses came and testified that Reuven was dead, but no witnesses came and testified that Shimon was dead. So now it's going to be it's going to help the opposite one. You might have said, oh, that helps Yael because we have witnesses her husband did. Said no, because we don't have witnesses that her yabam is dead. So she's stuck. So etchi yesh la edim asura. The one who has witnesses about her husband, she's actually the one who's forbidden because there's no witnesses about her husband, about her yabam. And therefore, she's not free to marry anyone she wants because the only testimony we have is Tamar's and she's not believed relating to Yael. But et she'ein la edu muteret. But the one who doesn't have witnesses, we believe her about her husband because a woman's believed about her husband that he's dead. And we have witnesses that the brother's dead, so she's actually free to marry. Next case, we're going to talk about all sorts of different permutations of this case where there could be minor variations that would make it more of an imbalance. So if Yael and Reuven had a son, Lizo banim, okay, or multiple sons, it doesn't matter. Lizo ein banim, and to the other couple, they didn't have any children. So etchi yesh la banim muteret. Obviously, Yael is permitted because if she says, my husband died, we believe her. And they had children, we know that. So she can be permitted to marry anyone she wants. But etchi ein la banim asura. Tamar, who has no children, is stuck because, again, we don't know for sure that Reuven's dead. Nityabu. Okay, now we get to another added element to this case. If Reuven and Shimon have two other brothers, and Nityabu, and when Reuven and Shimon died based on each of their own testimonies, they were each permitted to do yibum with Levi and Yehuda, right? The previous case was there was no one else. Here we have two brothers. So they each do yibum. So Yael marries Levi and yet Tamar marries Yehuda. Asurot linaseh. When Levi and Yehuda die, let's say they die, then they can't go marry anyone else because still we don't know, each one doesn't know, is Reuven alive or is Shimon alive? Okay, but Rabbi Elazar Omer, okay, so neither is permitted to marry. Rabbi Elazar disagrees and says, Ho'il v'hutru liyevamim, hutru lekol adam. Since we already permitted them to the Yevamim, basically meaning we acted upon, well, we're going to see exactly why this is. So let's just leave it for right now, and then we'll ask a question. We won't see the answer, but we'll ask a question about why Rabbi Elazar says this in the Gemara. Since they were permitted to the Yevamim, they're now permitted to marry anybody. Okay, they're free to go. See why in a minute. So the Gemara says, Tana, Lizo edim. Okay, now they're bringing a braita, which has another possibility that wasn't mentioned in the Mishna. Lizo edim ubanim. They combine case number 2 and 3. One has sons and witnesses. Now, remember, if she has witnesses, that doesn't allow her to marry because there's a yabam. Well, we don't know if there's a yabam or not. But she has sons, so we don't need the yabam. So in that case, she's going to be muteret. And if the other one has lo edim, the lo banim, the other one doesn't have witnesses, but she does have sons, then, she doesn't have witnesses, but she also doesn't have sons, which means because she doesn't have witnesses, but the other one has witnesses, it's clear the Yabam is dead, so she's allowed to marry based on that. In other words, they want to come up with the possibility that one will have this and one will have that, where we said in the Mishnah, those were different, right? Each one has a different law, but if you combine the two and they have, right, each one has one thing that allows them to marry based on that, then they can each get married. Say this is just a quote from the Mishnah. So again, once they already did yibum, then we're going to permit them according to Rabbi Elazar. So why is it? By Rav, my time to Rabbi Elazar. Is it mishum de kasavar tzara mi'ida lechaverta? Does he just disagree with this whole principle and think that a tzara or a future tzara, which is a yevamot, who's a future, they could potentially be future rival wives, is allowed to testify for her friend? O dilma mishum de hilo makalkala nafsha. Or is it because he believes that no one's going to mess themselves up? Now remember, what do these women do? They marry the yabam. Meaning if Tamar didn't really believe that Shimon was dead and she was just lying to mess up her rival, her potential future rival wife, Yael, well, she wouldn't have acted upon it and married the brother because that's curry. So is it because we assume she's not going to mess herself up? Before the Gemara answers the question, they ask another question, which is Lamai Nafkamina. What's the difference whether we say it's that or that? And for this, we're going to stop right here because that's the end of our daf, and we'll wait to finish this section up in tomorrow's daf. Have a great day, everybody.